All right, today I'm using a black Frederick's Red Label canvas, 12 by 16 inch, and this canvas is fresh out of the package. I have not prepared it in any way whatsoever. If you don't have a black canvas, you can paint a canvas black with gesso or black paint, whatever you prefer. Now for today's painting, I am going to be using this reference image that I got off of Pixabay, and there's a link in the video description below to where you can get it as well. Now, one thing I want you to realize with this image is there is way too much information here. So what I mean by that is when you look at this image, you might be intimidated by the amount of detail in the feathers. And I want you to not worry about that. Don't be intimidated by the amount of detail. I want you to just kind of break it down and take what's important to you and put that on the canvas. So the things that are important to me in this image are the colors and the light and shadow. So that's what I'm going to focus on. I'll end up getting some texture, but I'm not going to have the texture in this image because that would make me crazy to try and, duplicate all of that. So I am using it as a reference, but mostly it's just to draw the owl so I know where all of the parts go and to get an idea of where the light and the shadow is. But really, I'm going to be kind of doing the owl however I want to. I'm going to use my chalk pencil. Hopefully you can see this one. It's brown, which is really close to the color of the owl, so that's why I chose it. What I want to do first is figure out where the center is, because when I look at the image, the beak is right about in the center. So roughly there. The kind of bottom half of the eyes is right about center here. I think the brows are just a little above that. So that's going to be where the eyebrows are. Well, maybe I'll bring it down just a little. It's quite the intense sound. Hopefully that's not too aggressive in the microphone. Just get rid of some of those extra lines. And yeah, I think that's a good start. Now we can start kind of drawing the shape. It's a really simple shape. I know I'm going to get asked if I have a tracing element for this, and I'm not producing a tracing element because it really is quite simple to draw. And, there's nothing wrong with tracing, but I don't think that we should, handicap ourselves and, rely on tracing for everything. If it's a simple image like this, there's no need to trace it. And look at how simple this is. It's a dome. It goes from one side to the other. It almost touches the top. Maybe I don't want it quite that high. I think I like that better, so I'm going to bring this down just a little. That's better. Now the kind of feathery horn bits, whatever they are, let's see, we'll say they're right about here on either side. And if your owl ends up being completely different, that's okay. There's a lot of different types of owls. We'll bring this down and meet just under that center line. See right here. Here's where our center line is, but we're going to meet right under it. And then our beak is going to come off of that. It's a couple inches from the bottom. Well, yeah, almost about 2 inches from the bottom. And our eyes, make the eyes as large as you want. I'm just going to kind of start with a circle about like that. Notice how I'm kind of sketching it. I'm not, getting in here and trying to draw a perfect circle, because the more options I have like this, the easier it's going to be for me to find a circle that I really like. So I can erase any bits that I feel like are kind of outside of that shape that I'm looking for. Gives me a lot of room to work. I'll do the same thing over here. If you need to use like a tube of paint or something to stencil it, that's okay too. Now, if that's a little confusing looking to you because we have all of these lines and everything, you can go ahead and erase whatever you don't need. So let's go ahead and do that. The eyes are not going to be visible here because that's where the bird's forehead is. So the eyes aren't visible there. And we've got the eyebrows here, and I think I'm actually going to bring those down a little bit farther too. I don't feel like that's down far enough, so maybe I'll bring it down right about there. Much better. So there's my owl. Super simple to draw. We can go ahead and start painting him in. Now, for this painting, I am going to be doing a lot of layering and a little bit of glazing. And so for that, you are absolutely going to want either matte medium or gloss medium, glazing medium, some kind of a liquid. You don't want gel. A liquid medium that is made for layering. So you don't want to use slow dry blending medium. I always get asked about that one. That's not for layering. That's going to make your paint just stay open longer. You're going to have a hard time layering because it's going to, you know, kind of get you a muddy mess. So you want matte medium or gloss medium or glazing medium, liquid, not gel. Now for the vast majority of this, I'm just going to use my 1/2 inch flat brush. I'm going to wet it in my jar. Wipe it on the edge pretty good. And then I'm just going to lightly blot it on a paper towel. I don't want it dry, obviously, but I don't want it wet or the paint will get too thin with the medium. So I'm going to start with white and matte medium. I'm going to load up with some matte medium and pull just a little bit of white in. I want a very thin, very transparent color. You can kind of tell how thin and transparent it is on my brush. Hold your brush nice and far back, very loose, and let's just kind of start marking in where that's going to go. This doesn't have to look like anything. Please don't make very hard lines here. It's going to be really hard to cover up later. Just kind of scumble that on. See how transparent that color is? That's what we're looking for. Up here, kind of feather that out a bit on both sides. I know he's going to look super strange here for a few minutes. Maybe some shorter brush strokes in here. You don't have to worry about covering everything. We don't need a smooth coverage. Don't try to get rid of brush stroke marks. Those brush stroke marks are what's going to help you get the look of feathers. And see, all I'm doing there is just kind of going like that. Just very short, about 1/2 inch long brush strokes. Not a ton of paint. Can you see that? No globs of paint. If you have globs of paint here, it's going to start making it difficult. You can even turn your brush on the edge and get some different texture. Whatever you like the best. You don't have to worry about going outside of your line. You know, if you go out there, it doesn't matter. We're going to paint some black over anything outside of our shape later anyway. See, just a little bit of texture in there. Let's get a little bit more. Maybe I'll go just a little bit heavier on the white paint. And we'll kind of just keep that idea of texture in here and right up in here. I want you to work quickly and loosely here, and that's only because it's going to help you get a little bit more of a natural look. You know, if you're in here like this, going like this, it's going to look really stiff and it's going to take you forever and you're going to get frustrated. Let's get a little bit more. And I am looking at my reference image, but really just for an idea of where are some light bits going to go. We've got a little light up here on his eyebrow. Right here. Really, I'm putting this wherever I have color in my image. If it's black in my image, I'm not really putting this. I mean, I might put it a little bit, but I can cover it up later. Just getting an idea for where those browns and golds and whites are going to be later. Still just using that same little brush stroke. And turn your brush on your edge sometimes. Let's do this side. I want this side to be darker, like in my image, so I'm not going to put quite as much white. Now I know that sometimes we get, you know, scared and frustrated by the ugly stage, and, you know, our painting gets to the ugly stage and we're just like, oh, this looks so amateur, it looks so juvenile, it looks like a little kid did this is horrible, and we get frustrated and we give up on it. You know, but all paintings have an ugly stage, and so I want you to not be afraid of that ugly stage. This poor little owl, he's gonna live in the ugly stage for quite a while, so please don't be frustrated with that. I'm gonna use the edge of my brush now, and we're gonna start filling in some of these little directional feathers here. So you're kind of curving that in toward his beak. Maybe up here we'll curve it around the bottom of the eye a little. Just like that. And don't worry about his beak right now. We're going to do his beak. It's going to be one of the last things. Under his beak, we've got some more white feathers. We'll just kind of start it here. Kind of sketching back and forth. And then we'll just add little bits of some brighter color here and there. Don't worry about going too bright. You don't want to go white in the whole thing, but I am going to go back here in just a minute and add some pretty bold white to a couple of areas. See, we can already tell he's an owl, and we've already got some texture of feathers. This white is quite a bit heavier. I'm still only picking up a bit of paint, but there's less matte medium and more white in here. And I'm just going to kind of go in and scrub in just a little bit of texture with some brighter white. There, right there. And I'm just going to use the corner of my brush and same kind of thing. I'm just dashing that in there a bit. Flip my brush over to the other corner when it starts to wear off. Leave some places, you know, that don't have any of the bright white, and some places maybe are quite heavy in it. But don't get like an even disbursement, you know, of just like polka dot, polka dot, polka dot in rows. Really, you know, scatter it around. See how heavy my white is there? And I've got almost none over here, and that's okay. Because we're gonna do a couple of layers. All right, we're just gonna pop some brightness in a couple more areas, and we'll move on to the next part. At this point, now that I know where my highlights and my shadows are gonna go, I don't really need my reference image anymore, because I'm gonna kind of make it up as I go along from here on out, and my painting is gonna end up looking different than the reference image. Sometimes I feel like when we use a reference image, it gets stressful because we think, well, my painting doesn't look anything like my image. But I want to show you that it doesn't need to. You use a reference so that you can get the pieces of information that you need. You know, maybe how big something is, where it is in relation to other elements, how a shadow hits something. You're not looking at a reference so that you can do it exactly right, you know, exactly right, so that it can be exactly like the image. I'm just using this image so I can get the important bits of information. There we go. I think that's a good start to our owl. Now I want to let this dry completely. I'll probably get out my blow dryer so it'll only take a second. And then we're going to start layering our colors. Before we move on, I want to get you in here really close so that you can see something. A lot of times when we do layering like this, I hear, you know, people say, well, I had a really hard time with it. And then I look and I'm like, well, it looks like you used way too much paint. I want you to notice how much paint I used here. See that? I just laid this down just a minute ago. And I mean, I can still tell that it's damp, but it's not coming off of my finger. And it's very transparent. See how gray that looks? That is because of two things, both the matte medium that I put in there that thins the paint down, but also it's because the paint is very thinly applied, very thinly applied. This part looks a little heavier, but it's not. It just has less matte medium in it, so it's a little bit darker. Here in the forehead, it may seem like this is applied thicker, but it's not. There's just less matte medium in it. So it's just as thin. Well, I just applied that last, so it's coming off a little bit, but there's no texture to it. This appears very thin because it's applied very thin, but it also has a heavy amount of matte medium in it. So you do not want to apply this paint too thick. If you have texture at all, you're going to have a really hard time glazing over it later unless you let it dry really, really well. So nice and thin is going to be the way to go here. You know, I also wanted to mention that you could even do this on a different color of underpainting. It doesn't necessarily have to be black. I really wanted to make the highlights and shadows very dramatic in this painting, and that kind of requires a black background. But you could use red or brown. You could use hot pink. You could use anything that you like here. All right, now we're ready to start glazing our colors on. Now, I want you to pick whatever colors you like here. I've picked my two colors, but if you don't have them or you don't like them, please pick any colors you like. There's no need to worry about, you know, how do I mix that color or how do I mix that color? You can't really mix these colors anyway. I've got yellow oxide or yellow ochre, it's called in some brands, and burnt sienna. Still using my 1/2 inch and my matte medium. And I'm gonna get some yellow ochre first, pull out a bit. Be careful because yellow ochre is opaque. So you wanna mix just a little bit in at a time and see how that looks. You can always get more paint. I'm just gonna kind of start dashing it over. See, no real rhyme or reason. I don't have to worry about creating texture here. The white created the texture. Let's throw just a little bit more yellow in than that. So all I have to do here is just brush this color over it. I'm not going to cover everything with it. I'm not worried about keeping it off of the black. I'm just putting the color in wherever I feel like I want it. It looks more opaque when it's wet. As it dries, it will go a bit more transparent. Remember when I said this poor owl, he's going to live in the ugly stage for a while. You may be tempted several times to throw in the towel and just say, oh, my poor owl is so ugly. But just don't, because you can change anything. Remember, fear comes from not knowing if or how to change something. You know, you may not know that you can change something, and so you feel like you've totally destroyed a painting, but you can't change anything. And you may know that you can change anything, but not know how, and, you know, get frustrated and feel like you can't fix it, but you can. And I'm sure you're gonna see me do things in this painting that I'm like, oh, that's not what I wanted. And I may even do some of them on purpose, just so I can show you that anything can be changed. See how kind of sporadic I'm being with it? That's what I want you to do too. Nice thin color. And we'll put a little bit in there, not a ton. And a little bit in there. I think that's good. I'm gonna wash off my brush. And now I'm gonna get matte medium and burnt sienna. Burnt sienna is also quite opaque. So a lot of matte medium and just a little burnt sienna to start. You can come back and get more burnt sienna, but if you apply it too heavily, it's gonna be difficult for you. Now anything that I left white, I'm gonna dash this burnt sienna over. I'm also not trying to keep it off of the yellow. And if it mixes with the yellow, if the yellow's still wet, that's okay too. Let's get a little darker right in there, maybe some right there too. Glazing is a really fun technique because, you know, like layering, you can fix anything, nothing is permanent, but also I think it feels really magic, you know, to be able to kind of take something and change it. It's still there, you know, all that white is still there, but I'm just changing it. See, I'm just kind of taking this burnt sienna around the edge of this little feathery bit that I did here, leaving some of the yellow on the inside, but you can do that however you like. Just take a little bit of it over that. And there. If you take away too much of your light, don't worry about it. We're going to put it back in. If you make something too dark, or if you make something too light, you know I told you that I wanted this side to be darker than the other side, and right now it's got a lot more light in it than in my reference image. But I'm going to glaze with some Payne's Gray in a minute. And that's going to darken things up and really start to kick in some drama into him. Right now he looks kind of funny, I know, but I'm not worried about it. Just getting that burnt sienna on everything that I left white. I think I'm gonna go just a little bit heavier with it. Nice dark burnt sienna, so it's not heavy paint, it just has less matte medium in it. I'm just gonna kind of darken up a few areas in here. All right, let's let him dry again. Like I said, I'll probably get out my blow dryer and then we're gonna start adding in some dark areas. All right, this is where this starts to get really fun for me. I have some Payne's Gray and my matte medium still, and we're gonna start making sure that our shadows are in there nice and just really starting to build that kind of dramatic look that we want in the lighting. Now I'm using Payne's Gray for a couple of reasons. You can use Mars Black if you like. I'm not using Mars Black because Mars Black is a very opaque, very strong color, and I could easily obliterate everything with Mars Black. Payne's gray, on the other hand, is very transparent. It's a very soft color. So I can easily just kind of layer everything and make darker what I need darker, and just kind of knock down things that I want maybe just a little bit less bright. So I can do it a lot easier with Payne's gray. You can do it with Mars black, but it's going to be harder. You could also use maybe ivory black. Ivory black is much softer. So that's why I'm using Payne's gray. So I'm gonna get my matte medium and some Payne's gray. Again, mixing it quite thin, just so I know exactly how dark it's gonna be. I can always get more paint. And I know that I want it darker in here. I brought that color in, but I want it darker. So see how I'm just taking that Payne's gray right over it? You can still see all of it, but now it's a little darker. And if I decide I really want to get rid of something, I just pick up a little blob of it and just lay it down right over top. There we go. So that's kind of what I'm going to do all through here. Decide where I want some nice dramatic shadows. I am just going to kind of scrub it on there. A little bit heavier because it is a transparent color. I can just pick some of it up without matte medium. Just squidge out that line. I don't want a hard line there. Knock some of this down just a little. See how I'm lightly brushing over it? Just lightens it a bit. Just get rid of that line. Don't be afraid to scrub a bit. Let's get in here, make sure that's nice and dark, because we are going to have some shadow there. A little matte medium to smooth it out. Let's get a bit going on right in here next to the eye. This is definitely my favorite part. Just putting in this dark bit. And I would rather, if you're nervous here about how much to use, I would rather have you go a little darker than not dark enough. It's going to be easier to bring that color back than you think it will. So I'm almost just picking up Payne's gray there and just kind of darkening a few things, adding my shadow areas back in so it didn't get too light. Throwing a little shadow there. See how dark that was? I definitely don't want it that dark there, but it's okay. I'm not going to sweat it. Just break up that line. Nice and dark right in this area. Pretty much picking up just Payne's gray over for this side. But see how thin it is? See how I didn't cover all of those colors? Mars black absolutely would have just knocked those colors right out. They would have been gone. Matte medium there. See, super loose, super carefree. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. We gotta get some up in here. So this little brush stroke that I'm doing, can you see that? It's kind of the tip of the brush, almost like wobbling it back and forth. That's kind of what I'm doing. Or you can go onto the edge again, do a combination of both. Couple areas in there nice and dark. He's getting there. Let's get a little bit more of this dark, dark Payne's gray. Just a little bit of matte medium. Make sure that this side is nice and shadowy. That was the main thing that I liked about this owl painting, why I chose this image over, you know, all of the other images that are on Pixabay of owls, because the lighting was a bit more dramatic. And I really like a good challenge at, you know, light and shadow. I really like to be able to kind of play with light and shadow and see how much more dramatic I can make it. So I am gonna go a bit more dramatic, I think, on my owl than is in the photo. I'm just gonna darken that edge there on both of those, and I think that's good. Need just a little more dark in here. Sporadically again, remember, don't polka dot it and make this area look really even, because everything else is very mottled and, you know, the colors are very dispersed. So if everything in here is very, you know, there's just as much dark right here as there is right here or right here, then I feel like it's just gonna look kind of muddy and strange. And I know in our reference image it is a little bit more even as far as, you know, how the colors are distributed. But I find when I'm painting it, I like it better if I kind of break it up a little bit more. So that's what I'm gonna do. Okay, I'm gonna dry this again. Make sure that all of these colors are perfectly dry because we're gonna put some more white on top. Now I know there's a lot of drying time going on in this painting. This is definitely one that you could do over several days. You know, if you don't have a lot of time to paint, sit down and, you know, just sketch it out one day. The next day, come and do the first layer of white and just do one layer at a time. And then you can take your time with the painting and really work it the way that you need to while also fitting it into your busy schedule. So I'm gonna let this dry and we'll be back in just a few minutes. Okay, this is dry. And now we're gonna work on bringing some of that light, the white back, and developing the texture a little bit stronger. And to do so, I'm going to use my number 8 filbert. This is my fuzzy old Fuzzbert, but you can use any brush you have. I would recommend using one that's kind of puffy and old, which is one of the reasons I tell you never to throw a brush out. No matter how old or yucky a brush gets, there's always a use for it. So I wet my little fuzzy filbert in the jar and then just kind of daubed it on a paper towel. I'm going to get a little bit of white, not a ton of paint. All of this on the plate is dry. So I'm just pulling out a tiny bit and then squishing it into the bristles. Let's get a little bit of matte medium and mix it in there too. I'm gonna zoom you in here real quick so you can see how lightly I'm using the brush. I'm not gonna go flat and, you know, put a lot of pressure. And see how little paint I'm getting off? That's really all I'm gonna do. Just kind of start developing that texture. Flip it over. Don't push harder to get more paint. See, I'm not getting a ton of paint. If I push harder, I'm gonna get more paint, but I'm also gonna kind of lose that bushy look and instead just kind of fill everything in, and I don't wanna do that. Just kind of squidge a bit back and forth with the tip of the brush. And then when I absolutely can't get any more paint out of it, I'll pick up some more and kind of scoop up a little bit of it on the tip of the brush like that. See how we're starting to get that kind of sketchy, feathery look. Just kind of keeping you zoomed out there a bit, because when you're looking at it up close, it can be really difficult to see how those brush strokes are kind of affecting the whole image. It's easier to look at it and see it just kind of for the the scattery mess that it is up close. So at a distance, it's a bit easier. You know, you can kind of see a bit of a feathered look. And this isn't our final white layer, so this doesn't have to be perfect and gorgeous and, you know, look like awesome little feathers. It's just one more layer right here, just kind of doing that little sketchy up and down brush stroke, about 1/4 of an inch, maybe even less. Still being kind of sporadic with it. Some areas will get more than others. Very little pressure, it's just the tip of the brush. Let's just put a hint over here. I know I want this area a bit darker. In my reference image, the top of the head is pretty much lit evenly, but I like the idea of the really dramatic, you know, darker on this side, brighter on this side, which would kind of put it a bit darker right up in this area, and a little bit bright over here. So here I will add just a little bit more white. Just remember, it's always totally okay to deviate from your reference image. I know that sometimes you guys get frustrated because you look at your reference image and you think your image, your painting has to look just like it, and it absolutely doesn't. Like I said before, just take the bits that are important to you, the things that you like, the things that you know that you can do. If you see something and you're like, I don't know if I can do that part, well then maybe that part's not important and you don't have to do that part. Just throw a little bit more white in there, lighten that up just a little. And let's keep adding just some matte medium and some white. Just a bit in here, just to remind myself that this area is going to be white. Same in here. It's a little lighter up here, very light pressure to just kind of scratch that in. Maybe we'll just scratch a tiny hint of it in here. See, that doesn't really look like anything, but I'm going to glaze it again. It's just going to help build the depth and the texture in our colors. Okay, just kind of scrubbing that in there back and forth. Come back down into here and get a bit. Nice and heavy there. Let's do a bit on the other side. I'm going to thin it down with a little more matte medium so it's not quite as bright. Reminder about that area. And very light pressure. See, now you can kind of start to see the difference in value that I'm trying to build. You know, much darker on this side, much brighter on this side. And let's bring some white right back into here. Still just scribbling over it, not trying to cover everything beneath it. A little more matte medium, and maybe we can get some of these little sketchy bits down in here. Break that up a little. See, that was pretty bright, but like I said, I'd rather have you go too intense with your colors when you know you're gonna glaze, because you can knock it back. So it's okay if you go a little too dark. It's okay if you go a little too light. So it will all be fixed and changed at the end. This brush is a little hard to control because it's so puffy, but I kind of like that. It helps, you know, take away a little bit of control from me, and I feel like if my control is taken away, then I can't end up with a painting that's too tight. I just want to kind of pop a bit of brightness right here again, a little bit brighter. And see how he's really starting to come together. He doesn't look like an angry bird anymore, you know, like the little game. When I first drew him, I know he looked like he was straight out of Angry Birds, but he's not looking like that anymore. He also doesn't really look like my reference image at all, and I am perfectly okay with that. Just punch in some of that white. We'll let this dry, and we'll come back and do a little bit more glazing. Okay, I'm gonna let that dry now. Okay, this is dry. Let's do a little glazing again. So I think I'm gonna start with my matte medium and a bit of my yellow. Fairly thin mixture this time because I want the colors to start getting just a little bit lighter. Just take it right over top of everything. We'll start working on the eyes here in just a minute. Nice and golden right in here. Kind of leaving the white a bit on the top edge here. Get a bit in here. See, I'm not worrying about covering everything. I'm going to get just a little bit of a heavier amount of paint here, meaning less medium, more paint. It's not going to be a ton different than the other side, but just a bit. I know that looks really horrible right there because of the opacity of that yellow, but like I said, as it dries, it gets a little bit more transparent, and we're going to cover up anything we don't like anyway. Let's get just a bit of a bolder color. And just knock in a couple of super golden areas over here. Maybe just a couple up in here. Cleaned off my brush and onto the burnt sienna. Same thing. Now the burnt sienna, because it's a bit of a darker color than the yellow oxide, I am using it a little bit more for shadows. So if I want something to appear darker, I'm probably going to put the burnt sienna there rather than the yellow oxide. But that's just a choice I've made. You don't necessarily have to do that, because ultimately the Payne's gray is going to create our shadows. So I am going to rely a little bit heavier on the burnt sienna toward the left side of the owl. But notice I'm just kind of covering, you know, I'm going over areas that I put the yellow oxide. Sometimes I leave it, sometimes I don't. Nice thin color here. Maybe a little bit heavier for right in here. But I am going to pull it, you know, into the rest of the area as well. All right, while we let that dry, because I do want to go in next with my Payne's gray again. So while we let that dry, let's get started on the eyes. I'm going to go back to my pencil and just kind of sketch out where I want the pupil. Now remember, part of the eye is being obscured up in here, so you don't want to draw the pupil circular right here, because that's going to give him a really strange looking eye. What you want to do is decide how far away from the edge you want the pupil. So right there, it's roughly about maybe 3/4 of an inch. So you want to keep it roughly 3/4 of an inch all the way around. About like that. And keep in mind, we are not done with the feathers around the eye. So you don't have to, you know, make your eye start wherever your last color left off. Like my eye is a little lopsided here. You know, it comes down a little farther right there, but it's okay because I'm going to add some more feathers and details around there. So once we start filling in the eye, you can really start defining the shape of it. You're still not confined to what you have. I'm going to go to my 1/4 inch angle here, and I've got some cad yellow medium. I want really bright vibrant eyes, but you can do your eyes in any color you like. So I'm going to take this, and the inside here doesn't matter, we're going to paint that black. So really focus on defining your shape here the way you want it. Use that edge of the brush to create your line. Remember, don't try to create a line with your brush flat like that. Make sure you stand back to look at it to decide if it's shaped properly. And I'm going to do a couple layers on these eyes. So don't worry about getting it, you know, all filled in perfectly even right now. Just get the shape and the base color on there. And let's get the other one filled in. Err on the side of smaller than you actually want it, because you can make it bigger. So see, I'm not taking this line all the way up to that color. Gives me a little room to work. Not too bad. I'll probably decide they need a little adjusting as we go on, but I think that that's a good start. Notice that I left the edges of the eye broken right there where it gets up to there, because I'm going to darken it, and so I don't want a hard line that I have to deal with later. All right, back into the matte medium and the Payne's gray. And over here where we let the color get too light, which, like I said, is perfectly okay, we're really gonna knock some of this Payne's gray over it. And I like that because you can still see all the colors. You can tell that, you know, he's not black on this side. He's got all the same colors. He's just in shadow. So that's why I said the Payne's gray is gonna be so much easier than Mars black. See, I'm really taking that Payne's gray over almost everything over here, and then sometimes I get a little bit of a heavier amount and make some nice dark areas. you can do as many layers as you want. You know, if I happen to stop after this layer and you feel like yours is not where you want it, you don't have to. You can do another layer of white, you know, lighten some things up again, add your browns back in. Do it as many times as you like. In fact, I may do just a little bit more in a couple of places. Just a little bit. We'll see how I feel after this. Not too bad. I'm just going to get some solid Payne's gray and just really darken it right here. Matte medium just to smooth out the brush texture. There. Let's darken it right here, right around the edge of the eye, just a bit. I'm not trying to take away all of that yellow. Just want to indicate a shadow. A little heavier on the Payne's gray right in here. I love layering because I feel like, well, and especially, you know, glazing with layers, because to me it feels very meditative, and you know, you get to watch something kind of build, and ultimately you're in control of it, but at the same time there is a little bit of just kind of an observing type element to it, you know. Sometimes I feel like I'm just kind of watching it happen, and that's really fun. And if you feel like you're just kind of watching it happen, then I think you watch it, you bring a little less of a critical eye to it, you know. I feel like, anyway, that's how I am. And that makes it a little bit more relaxing. I think that's pretty good for that side for now. Let's move over to our lighter side. So I want to darken it right here, just under his brow. See how we still have all those colors there? You can still see the white and the yellow and everything. Definitely want to darken it right in here. Nice and dark. We'll matte medium and take it over top of that, because it's, you know, definitely lighter, but it's not going to be bright. Not right here. If you're afraid, you know, while you're doing this, you're afraid that you're gonna mess up a layer or whatever, I really want you to just kind of repeat yourself. No fear. There's no reason to be afraid. I can fix anything. I am perfectly capable, and I know that I can fix anything. I can do another layer, whatever it takes to fix it. You know, positive affirmation is really important, and it's really important that you help yourself with that. You know, it's just as beneficial to you as negative talk is detrimental to you. So if you're, you know, painting and you're like, oh, this looks horrible, well, imagine if I walked into the room and looked over your shoulder and said that to you. How would that make you feel? You know, if you say it to yourself, it's just as damaging to your psyche, I swear to you, as if I said it. I mean, your feelings might be a little more hurt if I said it, you know, but as far as what it does to, I'm gonna really kind of darken it up right here. As far as what it does to your confidence, it's just as damaging, you know? And, you know, do you feel good when I or someone else says to you, hey, your painting looks really great. I'm really proud of you. Does that make you feel good? You know, because it's gonna make you feel good and encourage you just as much if you say it to yourself. You know, even if you don't feel quite as flattered when you say it to yourself, you're not like, oh, thanks, self. I promise it is just as encouraging for you as if somebody else said it. I think I am gonna do one more layer of at least the burnt sienna. Just throw some more of this dark in, maybe just a little heavier right up here. There we go. A little bit here and there. Let's get a bit of a shadow going on in here. I know that looks horrible. Don't sweat that. I know that looks super bad. It's okay. There we go. All right. I think he's looking really, really good. I'm super happy with him so far. I'm gonna let it dry, and I am gonna do one more layer of the burnt sienna. Then I'll look at it, and I think I might be ready to move on to the detail white. Okay, I think I'm actually gonna go to my number 6 filbert for the eyes. And I noticed a little spot over here that is totally out of control. There we go. Okay, I also have some quinacridone. As you can see there, and like I said, use whatever colors you want. I'm just gonna throw a pinch of quinacridone in there. And let's just kind of start dabbing it in. Move it in there a bit. Little dabs, it's okay if there's some brush texture, because the owl's eyes aren't just, you know, a solid color. Which is why I went to the filbert, because I knew it would give me a little bit of texture. Make sure that edge is nice and crisp, and then come back in and kind of break it up a little. Bit more quinacridone. So a little bit of a bolder color. Still nice and soft right there. And for the other side. Super light pressure there. Okay, let's let that one dry for a few. And we'll go over and do the other eye. This eye is in a little bit more shadow, so if it ends up a little bit darker, that's okay. In fact, I may bring just a little bit more of the quinacridone mixture down into the middle. I'm not using matte medium here because I want to keep the paint nice and opaque. A little more quinacridone. So I want you to just kind of check in with yourself. You know, how confident are you feeling right now? You know, if the answer is not very, I want you to kind of give yourself a pat on the back. And, you know, just the fact that you're attempting is an accomplishment. Really, you know, doing it is an accomplishment. Making a painting come out exactly like you think it should be, I mean, I guess that's an accomplishment. But everything that happens between, you know, deciding to paint and finishing a painting exactly the way you want it, everything in between is an accomplishment as well. And I want you to remind yourself of that. You know, trying something you've never tried before, huge accomplishment, huge accomplishment. Just deciding to get going, deciding I'm going to do this painting, massive accomplishment. I just picked up a little bit of yellow. Let's just kind of brighten up the bottom bit. I mean, you guys know, you know how hard it can be to just get started. Sometimes getting started is the hardest part. So, you know, absolutely give yourself a pat on the back for starting. There we go. And a bit on this side. I'm definitely not done with these eyes. I know that they are still way too bright, but we're going to build toward it. Not too bad. I'm just going to work on touching up some of these areas. I decided I want to take my shadow all the way across that bit of brow. I don't want the orange or anything under that. Same over here. Okay, this is all dry. Let's do a layer of our burnt sienna with our matte medium. Kind of a bold color. And there we go. See how heavy I'm applying that? Pretty much covering everything except the bits that I know I want to be bright white. We are getting there. I think I am going to be ready for my brightest color here. Just a moment. I really love this burnt sienna in here. It gives it such a warm glow. It's not a color I use a lot, but you know, when it's the right color for something, man, it is the right color for something. In here, I am going to come back and just grab a tiny bit of yellow oxide. Not a ton, it's just like a little smear of it. Okay, I think that's about good. Okay, let's work on the eyes a little bit more because we need to finish the eyes before we can really start doing the details around it. So I'm on my number 6 filbert still. Use whatever brush you're comfortable with for this. And I'm pretty much just picking up yellow here. Kind of dash some in through the center, the area that I want to be the brightest. It's okay if a little bit of that color from before kind of pokes through. That's why we did it. And some quinacridone, a good amount. See, I'm just kind of mixing right into it. So this part is going to be quite bright. Dash that out right there. Remember, we want a soft line toward the back there. It'll just make it easier to cover later. Little matte medium just to help me with some blending. Dash that in there. I did pick up just a little bit of yellow. Not too bad. It will need a little bit of touching up in a bit, but that is pretty much what I was looking for. The quinacridone will really help keep everything bright so we get that, you know, deeper kind of orangey color. But because the quinacridone is so vivid, it helps keep that orange nice and bold. That's looking pretty good. I didn't clean off my brush, I just picked up yellow, but it's not going to be a bright pure yellow quite like on the other side. This side's a little darker like we talked about. Oh, I don't want it quite that dark. I just wiped my brush off on a paper towel. Let's do that again. There we go. That's much more like what I was wanting. There's still a hint of that quinacridone in there, but it's much closer to the yellow side. All right. Quinacridone. And again, I'm not using any matte medium, maybe a tiny bit when I go to blend between the two. But I don't need the transparency right here. So I'm pulling this down just a little farther than I did on the other side. Now I'll grab just a little point of matte medium and a little pointy yellow. And kind of streak from the yellow up into the quinacridone area to blend. A little more yellow. Just like anything else, do as many layers on the eyes as you feel like you need. Wipe off a little bit of that. A little matte medium. I'm just going to smooth this out. There we go. Just a hint of that orangier color. Just going to dash some in here with a little bit of matte medium. Just to mute that bright hot yellow a little bit, but not obliterate it. Just a little matte medium there. I'm just going to touch up the eyes a little. This one feels a little bit bigger to me than the other one. So I guess that's a good reminder that you can change anything, right? We're not stuck with lopsided eyes. That's why I said to stand back and look at it. I didn't stand back real well to decide, and then it ended up being just a little lopsided there. Another thing I can do is, make the pupil of this one a little bit smaller, like I'm working on, but then also I can make the pupil of the other eye just a hint bigger, and that will help balance them both out. So I'm probably going to do that. I'm just going to finish up what I'm doing here. And then we can put the pupils in. Just put the black part back in, and it's already black in the middle, but the black gesso of the canvas and Mars black paint, they're gonna look a little bit different. And without the Mars black in there, it kind of looks empty, but once we get the Mars black in, it won't look quite so empty. All right, got some Mars black and still my filbert. I'm just gonna pick some of that up, start filling this in all the way up to the eyebrow area. And clean up the shape of the pupil there. And like I said, I'm gonna just bring this one in a tiny bit further. So it matches the other side better. And also, once we put the shine on the eyes and the eyebrows and everything, it will cover up a little bit. So if it's still a little imperfect, it's okay, because, you know, the little details are gonna mask it. If we left it like this, I think it would be a little more obvious after the fact that the eyes are a little bit off from each other. But I think it will end up being fine. Okay, now I'm gonna go to my number 2 round. I'm gonna stick with my black, load up with some of that. And our owl has a little bit of an eyelid right around the edge. So again here, if the shape got away from you at all, you can correct it here. I'm just gonna put a little bit of a black line, just kind of a narrow black line, all the way around the edge. Right there, just kind of cleaning up that shape. See that? I might bring this one in a little bit. Whoa, that got away from me. That's all right. Just a clean, damp brush and it'll wipe right off. This side over here, I'm going to grab a little bit of white, just get a slightly lighter gray, or slightly lighter color, and just put a bit of a highlight on there. So I'm just going to kind of touch in there. Maybe just a little bit lighter than that. There we go. And I'm going to throw just a hint of it on the other side too. I know you don't really see that on the image, but remember I said we're not using the image as like the end all be all of what our image has to look like. It's just to get an idea. Back to my number 6, a little bit of matte medium, a thin amount of quinacridone. I'm just kind of glazing the quinacridone over this. It'll help even it out a little and just make sure it's nice and bold. Just picking up a little matte medium. Just spread it through here. Careful not to pick up any black if your black is still wet. There we go. I am going to darken these corners with one last layer. Much better. It's much smoother looking now. Just some matte medium there. I just wiped my brush off. A little bit of Payne's gray, maybe a tiny hint of quinacridone, a little matte medium. And we're going to take this all the way to the edge there and blend it. Not too bad. It's a little bit splotchy right here because my quinacridone was still wet, but I'll just let it dry and see. I might touch it up later, I might not. We'll decide after. I'm just going to finish up this eye. But see, I'm not worrying about little things that I perceive to be imperfect. You know, don't spend time on things like that because it could derail you, and you know, trying to correct things sometimes before you've really given them a chance to see how they look once everything else is in place. Sometimes I find that that can make the whole process harder. You know, you start trying to correct something and you might end up making it worse, when if you just leave it, it'll be easier to correct once it's dried a bit, but also you may decide you don't need to. Just pick up a little point of quinacridone there to help blend that. You know, paint looks different once it dries. When it's wet, it looks one way. When it's dry, it looks another. So give it the opportunity to dry before you really decide what you want to do. All right, let's start doing some details. So I'm gonna stick with my number 2 and I'm gonna go into white. Good amount of white. I have a little extra water on my brush, but after loading up, I'm gonna kind of turn my brush as I lift it so I get a nice sharp point. Let's start maybe right in here. So just using the very tip of the brush, I'm just gonna kind of start carving that in. So we're just gonna kind of scratch those in. Oh, I need to do the beak. Well, I already started this, so we'll just keep going for a minute and then we'll do the beak before we finish up with the little detail feathers. I think you'll see a big change after you do this part. I think it's easy to be tempted to kind of groan at the way your owl looks at this point. I know that I've had a couple where I stood back and looked at him and said, oh, that's not what I want. But I know that once we get the white in here, things are really going to start looking different. He doesn't have any real detail just yet. Let's keep going. I'm going to take this pretty much all the way in, even though I want it dark back there. And the other side. See, I'm just kind of using a motion like this. And, you know, I don't have my hand on the canvas. And that might take a little bit of practice for you, but, you know, just get a junk canvas and any color of paint and just practice this motion until you get it. And, you know, if you have a hard time with it now, I know it can seem like, oh, that's something I will never be able to do. But I promise a little practice and you'll be able to do anything you want. I haven't always been able to have that kind of control over a paintbrush, so I can promise you that a little practice is all it takes. I know that sometimes you guys watch me do things like this and you think, oh, I'll never be able to do that. But you need to remember that we all start somewhere. Even me and, you know, anybody else. We all start somewhere, and I haven't always been able to do the things that I can do. Practice goes a long way, and it will take you as far as you want to go. See, just with that, he's starting to look better. I'm going to go back to my filbert, and I'm going to get just a little bit of Mars Black, and I'm going to mix it with some Payne's Gray. And I'm going to get just a tiny poke of white in there and start filling this in. All the way down to the tip of the beak here. Let's get another little bit of white. Kind of lay it there. I'm going to wipe the extra off of my brush. And then light pressure, I'm just going to start dashing it in. I'm keeping the white mostly toward the part of the beak facing us and the right. Because just like the face, I think it's going to be a little bit darker on the left side. Just smear out some of those brush stroke lines. Tiny poke more white. I'm just going to kind of pop, highlight there. Maybe I'll wait until that dries and come back so I can get a nice bright spot there. Okay, that's dry now. Let's just add a little tiny poke of white and just kind of smear it. And now we have a nice reflection on the beak. I'm gonna go back to my number 2 round, a little extra water on it, and mix that water in with some white. Got some fresh white because my other white was starting to get really thick because it sat for quite a while. Nice sharp point, and let's work on the eyebrows here. So I do want very delicate little feathers. So I am going to put my hand on the canvas because I want also kind of short ones. So very light pressure and just kind of start, see, flick it outside of that shape. And you can make them go in different directions. If you're not comfortable using a brush like this to do these little lines, if you're more comfortable with a liner or even a, a small angle, use whatever it is that you are the most comfortable with. I am even going to bring some of those down. I do want it darker over here, but just like on the feathers under the eye, I am going to take the lighter color in farther than I actually want it to be lighter, and I'll show you why in just a minute. See, all different directions. Nice light pressure. Don't be tempted to put heavier pressure on your brush when you're not getting paint anymore. Because then you'll just get a wider line. And the other eyebrow, and this might be a little more tricky for you if you're right-handed. I should have done this, and it's something I do a lot, but if you're right-handed and you're concerned that you're not going to be able to do the left-handed side and get it to look the same way, one trick is to start on the left. Rather than starting on the right and getting it to look exactly the way you want it, start on the left, because it'll be easier for you to adjust the way you do it on the right to make it look like the left side. And likewise, if you're left-handed and you're concerned about getting them to look the same, start on the right. But also with this painting, because the left is going to be in more shadow than the right, I'm not quite as worried about it because I am going to just kind of glaze some darker color just a little bit over this side. So I know it looks super bright right now and a little out of place, but I'm not going to leave it that bright. I'll just get all those little ones in there. And let's add some little detail ones around his eye. So I'm going to go super fine here. If you can tell on my brush, it has a very sharp point, very, very sharp point. And that's all I'm allowing to touch. I want to get you in here really tight so you can see exactly what it is I'm doing. Hand is resting on the canvas, and I'm just going to touch that little tiny bit and do these teensy tiny brush strokes. See, sometimes I don't get any paint, but my motion is the same, and it may take me a couple of little motions before I get a brush stroke, but that's okay. Just going to take a few of these around the edge of his eye. Make sure you stand back, do a little bit, and then stand away from him to kind of gauge how that looks. Don't judge it standing right here in front of it and think, oh, I need more than that, because you might stand back and think, oh, I put too much. I definitely want more than that. I'm going to bring it in farther, close to that little black, the little black line that I put around the edge of his eye. See, it's just these teeny tiny brush strokes. This is where you can kind of get zen. Don't try to, rush this part. Don't be impatient with this part, because if you try and rush this, if you get impatient, you're going to end up with really large, streaks of feathers that you may not like. Now, if that happens, because it may happen, I could do it any second now, accidentally do a big, huge, blop of a line. And if that happens, you can either grab a damp brush and just wipe it off real quick, or don't worry about it. Just leave it. Move on to a different part, and once it's dry, just come glaze over it with something else and do it again. But what I don't want you to do is freak out. See, I'm going to just slowly taper these off as it comes around. And then I might come in and just put in one or two that are a little bit bolder. Not a lot. And now let's do the other side. I'm going to do much less, obviously, and I am going to glaze over it with some of my dark. See, I'm not getting, but I keep going because eventually I'm going to get one. Don't get impatient and cram down on it. And it's a little harder with my left hand, or with painting on the left side of the canvas, especially with a camera between me and what I'm trying to do. So just allow yourself to kind of find that little zen place and enjoy all of these little brush strokes. Don't judge any of them. Don't freak out if you get one you don't like. Just keep going. Decide when you're done if anything needs to be taken away or changed. Let's get a little bit up here. Same exact thing. Just little tiny bits. It can go outside of your shape. It can stay inside your shape. But kind of, randomize it a little bit. Meaning, don't, do like a line, a line, a line. Don't do it like that. Don't do that. Sorry, you didn't really see that real well. Same exact thing, just little bits. Again, into this area where I want it quite dark. I'm just going to make him kind of a puffy little guy. And just remember, you can glaze back over any of these that you don't like. Any of them at all. So you can kind of experiment and decide, do I even like the white right there? And if the answer is no, just glaze back over it. But you know, don't be afraid to play and experiment. Already, I can tell you, I'm adding more white to him in these little bits than I had planned. And I may or may not keep all of it. Let's just do a tiny hint over here. See, those are a little intense. Definitely brighter than I wanted. But notice I'm not freaking out. I'm not rushing to change it. I'm just leaving it. Maybe I'll put the tiniest bit up here because this area is a little brighter. And in here, I'm just going to kind of scribble a little bit. I can put a little heavier pressure. These are some larger areas. Occasionally change the direction a bit. You know, I think down here in this area, if you keep everything kind of moving in the exact same direction, it's gonna look stiff and boring. And I feel like my underpainting is kind of doing that. It's kind of all going in the same direction. His little mustache or whatever it is. I don't really know anything about birds. Same type of thing, not trying to cover everything. Leave little lines in between because that will help kind of indicate where the feathers break apart. Again, I should have started on the left side. So even though I didn't do that, it is a good trick. And it can help you get better symmetry. Just start on the left if you're right-handed. Start on the right if you're left-handed. Okay, before we go on to his crest, we need to finish up this area. So I'm gonna go back to my number 6 filbert, and I'm gonna get a little bit of matte medium and some Payne's gray. I did that backwards, but you understand. Matte medium and Payne's gray. And I'm just gonna glaze over top of that. See how it's still white. It still shows that there's white feathers in there, but they're in shadow now. And I can take a little heavier amount of Payne's gray and even streak a little bit of it into here. And on this side. And I might as well do that in here while we're at it. So see, all of those white feathers, they're still there. They're just in shadow a bit now. Just lightly dusting some of that thin Payne's gray over it. Take it as dark as you want on the interior. On the other side, I'm going to glaze that out a little bit more and maybe a little bit darker. A little more matte medium. Just a hint of it over these little guys, so they're not bright white. Again, don't worry about the background. A little bit more Payne's gray. Take it as dark or as light as you like. I'm going to take this just a bit darker. Okay, back to my number 2 and my white, and we can start working on the crest area. So I'm just going to start kind of flicking some of these out and kind of come down over the edge of the beak a little bit, which is why we had to do that shadow before we could move on to this part. All kinds of crazy directions. Still just enjoy this part and, you know, don't let it stress you out. There's no reason to stress out. It's just paint. Remember that if you make a mistake or do something that you don't like, all that is an opportunity to learn something. You can't learn without making mistakes. See, he's getting puffy looking and cute. And all just from a few little white lines. You can also come back and add some black or some Payne's gray lines if you feel like you need it. I may or may not do it, we'll see. Up here I'm going to put a little heavier pressure because I want this part to be nice and puffy. A little bit fatter lines. And go back in with a little bit of a stronger white and just punch some of those, make them a little bit brighter in a few spots. Other side. Some of these go in, some of them straight up, some of them come out, some of them are longer or shorter, fatter, skinnier. They're all just a little different. If you want, you can come back in and just kind of add some little bits in here of some white. I don't know that I'm going to do a whole lot. It's really just kind of a little scribbly mark, just kind of like that, almost just scribbling with the very tip of the brush. Not putting down a ton of paint, just indicating some brighter white in there, here and there. Guess I could zoom it in there a little bit so you can see just the tip of the brush. Even streak out the bottom edge because I don't want real hard shapes in here. Just really a suggestion of, maybe in here we'll kind of go sideways a bit because it's like what we did with the black. Remember when I said, oh, I know that black looks weird because I did those lines, but I think it helps kind of look like some feathers are facing you. So I'm pulling a little bit of this shape into the center here. See, so a little arc and maybe some little flicky uppy bits. And then everything else is just kind of a little scribble. Even up here where it's nice and dark, little hint of the light. Nothing makes dark look darker than a bit of light, and nothing makes light look lighter than a bit of dark. So that's how you're gonna get white to look nice and bright. I do hear sometimes my white isn't bright enough. Why doesn't my white stand out enough? It's not light enough. The reason isn't because your white isn't light enough, it's because your darks aren't dark enough. It's the contrast that helps make either stand out. That's why the white stands out so nice on this painting, because of all of the black in the background, and you know, probably 60% of the owl is in shadow, or at least not direct light. And so that makes the light seem a little bit brighter. And likewise, the fact that our lightest part is pure white, that helps the dark seem darker. I think I'm about done up here. I'm going to stand back in a second and see what I think. See how it's just these little tiny dashes of white. It's really not a lot. Just about. And then we have 2 more things to do. They're both pretty quick, and then we're done. Okay, I'm back to my number 6 filbert. I'm gonna get the tiniest point of white. Can you see that? It's just a tiny bit. I'm gonna come over here and I'm gonna grab a bit of matte medium, and then I'm just gonna mix them together. Get a very transparent color. I'm just gonna pick somewhere on the eye. It doesn't matter where. And press my brush flat and streak it down. Maybe I'll do another one right there. It really doesn't matter where you put it. What matters is that it's in the same spot on the other side. But I'm going to take more matte medium. I did not pick up more paint. Mix that in there. And that way it's going to be a little bit thinner on this side. It's not going to be quite as bright. Just a little pinpoint of white to really kind of pop it there. Okay, 1/2 inch flat. I've got some black, and I don't need to, you know, go too overboard on the background here. What I'm really going to do is just kind of even out the color here and kick back anything that might have gotten away from me. You know, where my Payne's gray went over the background or whatever. If you have little, you know, feathery bits that poke out over the background and you paint over them here, just add them back in later. I'm not even going to draw a hard line around the edge of my owl. I'm just kind of scrubbing to clean up anything that got out of control. There's going to be a little bit of a sheen difference here between the black of the canvas and the black paint, but once it's varnished, you won't be able to tell that. See, if I didn't like that, I just take that black right over it. And I like over here that my owl is really going to kind of fade into the background a little bit. Okay, that's it, and I'm going to sign it.